This is Lochleven, the largest loch in the lowlands of Scotland, home to a nature reserve, and on an island just off the western shore, Lochleven Castle.
It's played host to one or two famous guests over the years, and some of them were here by choice. Welcome to Scotland Unplugged, and the tale of a very royal great escape.
You're not normally allowed to fly a drone from the island, it's privately owned, but I was lucky enough to get special permission.
There's been a castle here for some time. It was a focal point of the Wars of Independence, when the English army took hold of it and then it was taken back, possibly by William Wallace. If you want to visit though, you have to take the ferry. I've already had one bodged attempt owing to some high winds last week. It's not a big ferry. The castle you can see now dates back to about the 14th century. Robert the Bruce visited here in 1313 and then again in 1323. Then David II, Bruce's son, locked up his own nephew, who would go on to have the last laugh when he became Robert II. But he's not the most famous prisoner. In 1562, Mary Queen of Scots visited here for a week to recover after falling off her horse. Then she came back in 1565 and spent some time arguing with John Knox about religion. Can imagine that went on for a bit. When she returned on the 17th of June 1567, it was as a prisoner during what was one of the most turbulent periods of a decidedly bumpy life. Mary had recently married James Hepburn, Lord Bothwell, her third husband, who may or may not have abducted her. Mary and Bothwell were widely suspected of plotting to see off her last husband, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, who was blown up and then smothered. Darnley was Mary's first cousin and determined to get his hands on the crown matrimonial, giving him equal rights to rule. He was so determined he'd plotted to have her private secretary and favourite person in the world, David Rizzio, stabbed 56 times in front of her. Her Protestant nobles didn't approve of the marriage. They didn't really approve of her. Mary and Bothwell faced an army raised by 26 Protestant lords, known as the Confederate Lords, at the Battle of Carberry Hill, but had to climb down when their army slowly ebbed away during negotiations. Bothwell was given safe passage from the battlefield and fled the country. Mary surrendered to her nobles, who eventually sent her here. And this is where it all gets a bit close to home. Mary's father was James V. The owner of the castle was Sir William Douglas. His mother was Margaret Erskine, a former mistress of James V. And they had kids. The oldest, James Stuart, the Earl of Murray, if he'd been a legitimate heir, would have been king. So Mary was stuck on an island with the mother and half-brother of her own half-brother, who they wanted to be in charge. I mean, family holidays can be rough, but shortly after arriving, she fell ill with what looked like poisoning, and between the 20th and the 23rd of July, she miscarried twins. On the 24th, she was forced to abdicate in favour of her 13-month-old son, who would become James VI. That meant someone had to be regent and look after the tedious day-to-day running of everything. Step forward, James the Earl of Murray.
We know Mary was here, we know she abdicated, we know she escaped. Some of the details in between, though, are sketchy. Here's the version that's been handed down.
When James VI was crowned, William Douglas lit bonfires and fired guns to celebrate and wind Mary up. Mary wasn't taking any of this lightly though. She got stuck into planning her escape, but they weren't going to make it easy. She was constantly surrounded by members of the Douglas family, with William's wife even sleeping in her bedchamber at points. But Mary was a 24-year-old queen, and cultured. She'd been brought up in France. She was said to be easy on the eye, and 5'11". She must have been quite an imposing figure, and she used it to her advantage. George Douglas, Sir William's 18-year-old brother, and a page boy, Willie Douglas, who was 16 and may have been Sir William's son, were smitten. George came up with some plans to get Mary free, but Murray got wise to his plotting and banished him from the island. But wee Willie was still around and began smuggling her letters.
The first attempt was on the 25th of March, 1568.
A good 10 months into her time on the island, Mary disguised herself as a washerwoman, boarded a boat, and almost got away with it. Her hands gave her away though. They were too pale, nowhere near red enough to have spent much time scrubbing. The boatman turned around. That probably didn't do a lot for Sir William's blood pressure, and he tightened up her security, banishing Willie from the island as well. George was still around though, and he wasn't daft. He wrote to his mother saying that he was leaving for France. Willie wasn't considered a threat anymore and was allowed to come home. George had no intentions of heading for France. He had one of the Queen's pearl earrings and wrote to her saying he would send it back as a signal when he'd arranged for her escape on his side. A boatman eventually turned up here with the earring, and it was time to go. On the 2nd of May, Willie, an excitable teenager, had arranged a masked ball for the May Day celebrations. It was his party, so he cast himself as the Abbot of Unreason, a title that gave him the right to make anyone his slave for the day, to make them join in party games, down pints, etc. In the run-up to that, he'd pegged all the boats to the shore, apart from one. Then he made everyone drink as much wine as possible and got them involved in some mad dancing. Mary had avoided the celebrations and switched clothes with her companion, Mary Seaton. Willie was in the main hall, where Sir William sat 3 sheets to the wind, with the keys to the castle gates. He dropped a handkerchief or a napkin over the top of the keys to stop them jingling, then artfully half-inched them and left. The pair ran from the castle, jumped in the available boat, and headed out into the loch. The rest of the household could only watch, locked in as the escapees rowed across the water. Willie supposedly threw the keys into the loch, where a set were found in 1791. When they got to the shore, George was waiting with supporters and horses, and they were off. It wouldn't be long before Mary lost the Battle of Langside and was imprisoned again, this time by her cousin Elizabeth I, who in the end would have her executed. But in that moment, rowing away and then riding away into what must have seemed like a different kind of future, things must have felt pretty good.
Her ghost is said to haunt the island, along with numerous other places.